everybody. Dr. Misty here. Thanks so much for joining me today on Wellness Wednesday. Today, we're actually going to dive in a little bit about generational trauma and understanding how, not just on an emotional level and a patterns level, but how it genetically gets passed on from generation to generation, and how you can help yourself in stopping this on a health level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen today. We're going to dive into this a little bit more. There's a post that I had put up earlier in the week that is great information. Not a lot of this is very well known in regards to trauma and PTSD. The topic of epigenetics is more of the last decade-ish. And it really has to do with, if you've never heard the term before, epigenetics is really about the expression of our genes. So for a long time, modern medicine has thought that we are kind of a slave to our genetic pool, right? That, you know, mom and dad had cholesterol issues, so I'm going to have cholesterol issues. You know, so-and-so had mental illness, so I'm going to have mental illness. It really has a lot to do also with our epigenetic expression. So I kind of want to go into that a little bit more and help you understand how you can help yourself in helping with that the epigenetic expression for yourself. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. Oops, not yet. Okay. Where am I at? Okay, hold on 1 second here. Nope. Okay. So let me try this again. Sorry, guys. 1 second. Okay. So I'm going to share here. Okay, hopefully you guys can see this. So basically our genes and our DNA is like a coding system, okay? We're not going to get into this in depth, but just to understand how this works for your own health. So what happens is a normal DNA sequence, there's usually base pairs here, and there's usually a coding of the DNA. And so the specific coding, it codes for a specific trait. Okay, so the normal DNA here, this is what gets passed on and helps you have, you know, blue eyes or your height or whatever. So basically again, going back years and years when we thought we were kind of slaves to our genes, we're looking at a mutated DNA, which was an issue in the DNA sequence. So there's a disrupt this is called a single nucleotide polymorphism, okay, or a SNP, if you hear the word SNP, okay, ever used. So essentially, one of the nucleotides that makes up the pairing and the coding, there has a mutation, okay? So what happens is in epigenetics, we're not necessarily trying to say that we can change the coding on our DNA. What we're saying is we can change the expression of the coding, okay? So here is what's called, this is an unmethylated DNA, and this is a methylated DNA. This is an example of how the DNA gets expressed and changed. So what we're essentially saying is that by having differences, just because there's a difference or a SNP in our DNA, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are destined for that disease, okay? I'm going to stop for 1 second. So essentially what I mean is the SNPs, which are, again, the single nucleotide polymorphisms, and I apologize if this is a little bit more confusing, but really we're looking at the single nucleotide polymorphism is going to tell us whether or not we are more than likely to have a disease process present, okay? Or we're going to have a drug interaction or things like that. So SNPs are great at understanding the disease processes in our body, okay? So if you have a SNP that's more likely to have detoxification issues or cardiovascular issues, you really want to make sure that you are supporting that genetic defect so that you're not getting that diseased expression of the gene, okay? So again, not necessarily changing the coding because we're not able to do that, but changing the expression of the SNP is the most important, okay? So I'm going to share one more time, and I just want to check one thing here. Okay. So there we go. Okay, so this is the post I put up the other day. So these are the SNPs that are, there was a really great article, and I can post the article below for you guys. There's a couple different research articles that I pulled this from because this is not common knowledge. And a lot of, if you do like a SNP report or an epigenetics report, some of these don't even come back with this, okay? So, and some of these, some of the articles were more newer articles. So these are defects in parts of our DNA that are connected to PTSD. And this is where it comes down to understanding that our genes can be, it's hereditary, almost how trauma can be hereditary, because you can pass on even the epigenetics and the SNPs in the gene, but you can always change the expression, okay? So again, understanding that not just because of the environment that we have been in. So if you have, you know, you were somebody who more grew up in a, you know, a familial dysfunction, or different than if you had trauma later in life or things like that, or an abusive relationship later in life. If you were in a situation where you had either an abusive, dysfunctional childhood, you're more than likely to have this, more because of, you're more likely to have PTSD. And that's not to downgrade anybody who was in an abusive relationship that has complex PTSD or PTSD now, but this is more likely to be passed on generationally if it was from a childhood experience because of the genetic aspect of it. Okay, if that makes sense. And so, in understanding that whoever was the passer could have been experiencing a lot of these same things unknowingly. So looking at the gene SNPs, this one is actually the most prevalent and powerful. The FKB P5, there's a bunch of different expressions, but that gene SNP in general is caused from specifically, has been known to be linked specifically with childhood abuse and PTSD expression. What happens is, because of we talk about adrenal fatigue, because of the increase in stress hormones and the downregulated methylation, you're going to get expression of this. What you're going to get is, here it is, adrenal fatigue, HPA axis dysfunction and dysregulation. What that means is that HPA is your hypopituitary adrenal axis. Okay, so I'm throwing a lot of big words at you here. What that really means, and you can look this up in previous videos as well, is that your endocrine system and your stress response is hyperactive. And so what is also going to throw off this gene and cause the expression is essentially chronic HPA axis dysfunction. Okay, and it's going to change this hormone and chemistry, which is going to express this SNP. Okay, so that, and this shows up again, mostly has been linked to significant childhood abuse and PTSD. So really, we want to focus on methylation. So increase in specific B vitamins, but also decrease in HPA axis dysfunction and adrenal fatigue. So if you are hyperstimulating your adrenals, you need to bring those cortisol level down. A great way to do that is using phosphatidylserine. Typically, I use this actually at night with a lot of my patients who have kind of phase 1 adrenal fatigue, or even phase 2 when their their cortisol is like way up high. A lot of times we'll do phosphatidylserine to bring those cortisol levels down to get a better night's sleep. Okay, this is also what can make you also linked to very jumpiness, things like that. Okay, so moving down, this one here, the RGS2. Okay, so this genetic SNP is expressed from high stress environments. And what happens is your GABA receptors get decreased, which cause anxiety. Okay, so this being expressed, high stress environments, this can also be reduced this can actually be increased more and be counteracted by high levels of aspartic acid or aspartame. So what I would say as like more treatment for that, if you have, if you've ever done any of these testing or done like a neurochemistry panel, which is something that I do as well with patients, is understanding that, okay, we have our GABA receptors, which is one of the main neurotransmitters in your your spinal canal, in your brain. And what that does is it helps to decrease nerve impulses and excitement, right? So if you have a lot of excitement, your GABA will act as like kind of a flood to like neutralize it. It's a neutralizer, okay? So if you have nerve cells going like setting off everywhere, the GABA will come in and it inhibits it, okay? So think of that as kind of a calmer. Okay, so if you were having decreased GABA because of the high stress environment, you're going to have what? Anxiety. Okay, so a lot of times, again, if you are somebody with chronic stress, you typically have this, anxious levels to you as well. There's high stress, but there's also anxiety. There's things in our brain that kind of like fuel that. Okay, so using GABA is an excellent way to combat that. Usually I use a supplement called Zen. It's a supplement with GABA in it and L-theanine, which is a really great natural amino acid to calm the nervous system. But again, high stress environment is going to, especially chronically, is going to express this. Okay, our COMT gene stem. So this one is actually really interesting because this I see a lot in patients with hormone issues and adrenal issues too. Okay, this one comes up a lot, and again, the expression is from high stress or abuse and trauma. What it does is affects the chemistry of not only our stress hormones, our norepinephrine and epinephrine, like fight or flight. It also affects our dopamine receptors, which is our pleasure in the pleasure centers of the brain, as well as our estrogen levels. Okay, so it breaks down this, when this is expressed, it breaks down your stress hormones a lot slower. Okay, so when you're having expression of COMT, you're getting slower breakdown of these stress hormones and estrogens. So you might have an estrogen dominance type of issue, okay? So, in that case, when we're seeing that, this is something that you really want to look at is the patient's stress levels and adrenals. I'm always surprised to see so many people with issues with their hormones and weight gain and adrenals that, the traditional medical model is not looking ever at the adrenal issue going along with this. And, and then going even further back here, looking at the genetic expression in their body, like what's happening, where's the petri dish of stress that their body is in, whether it's environmental or, mental, and you have more of just this kind of like addictive stress hormone type of thing going on. So what you want to do to support the COMT is definitely using magnesium and vitamin C. That will help with some of the breakdown of the hormones as well. This is detox is really important here too. Okay, that will help break down the estrogens better as well. So coming down here, DRD2, this one is specific for PTSD. Okay, so this one's specific for the pleasure centers. This works directly on your hormone receptors. So again, the pleasure centers of the brain, think of this is more like addiction. This shows up a lot in patients with addictions, whether it be food, alcohol, shopping, gambling, whatever it may be. That's typically mood disorders, very typical with patients who have issues with the DRD2, their dopamine receptors. This is a big tip off for that. You may see this with patients who are also have some bipolar, things like that, like mood disruption. Okay, so a lot of the, all this is high stress, but the expression of this through PTSD is essentially just kind of like that chronic cycle of that, just kind of those low vibration emotions, kind of that chronic stress. PTSD is like, it's like a cyclical thing. It's setting it off all the time. The dopamine pathway, okay? And it's important to understand that I'm giving you guys supplementation on the back end. Again, this is for informational purposes only, so please, I can't actually prescribe this to you. You'd need to either speak with me first or your physician, but just for informational purposes, so you understand, you know, helping your dopamine pathways. This is really great for getting off like sugar addiction. Sorry about that. I just got kicked off here. Hopefully this picks up where I left off. I'm going to go ahead and try and share my screen again. One moment. Okay, I apologize for that. Hopefully you guys can see me back on here. Okay, so going back to the DRD2, looking at really working on the expression of dopamine to help regulate with mood. So we want to look at the amino acids, tyrosine, phenylalanine, and DHA, the fatty acids. So so EPA, DHA, the omega-3s, okay? That's really important in management of this. But the other thing is, again, I'm talking about supplementation. Another thing that you can really do to regulate a lot of these and a lot of where our hormones and our neurochemistry gets produced is actually in our gut. Okay, so gut health is so big in this. I'm giving you specific examples of supplementation to try and modulate that. But it really, like, gut health is so important when it comes to all this and the expression of this. And so again, this shows up in chronic PTSD, the SLC6A3. Now this is not just dopamine receptors, but this is dopamine transport. So how the neurotransmitter gets transported. And so using ginkgo, ginkgo is great. Mucina purins is really great. I never know how to pronounce that, right? But again, modulating mood to help with the transportation of the dopamines. A lot of the dopamine can be really affected with patients with PTSD in the pleasure centers because of the structure of the brain in this environment. And kind of just kicks off this expression. The way the brain gets changed to adapt to chronic stress almost sets off this cyclical effect of the genetic expression. Okay, and then this last one here, the ADCYA-P1R1, this again also has to do with estrogen receptors. So patients with maybe mood and anxiety or hormone dysregulation might also see this. You may even have headaches in women. And it's going to show up as mood, anxiety, and dysregulation. And so here are a couple really great supplementations. These are more what I usually recommend for patients with hormonal type of issues. But it's really important to understand that this is also these are really good down regulators of this gene SNP. Okay, this is why root cause is so important, because it's not just about regulating the hormones, it's like what's going on in the first place. So red clover, sorry, that should be an L there. Dawn Q and evening primrose is a type of oil, similar to like the omega-3s. So I really just wanted to give you guys an idea on how you can help yourself with genetic expression. Now, really, the genes get expressed if they're getting wrongly expressed or they're getting expressed for disease and they're showing up a lot as PTSD. What's happening is that you're getting too much overexpression and not enough regulation of the system, and that can be due to, again, our stress and thought cycles, sometimes even emotionally addictive emotions and emotional states. So you're kind of addicted to being at a specific level because that feels the most comfortable for you. Coming out of that can feel almost uncomfortable. We can get stuck in it by our thought patterns and limiting beliefs. We can get stuck in it because of specific environmental toxins. So if you are somebody who has, let's say, an aluminum or mercury toxicity, a lot of the times those types of toxicities are very big, neurotoxins. And so mercury, you're going to get a lot more type of neurotoxic type of symptoms. That because those toxins are going to be blocking a lot of those receptors. They can block hormone receptors, they can block cell receptors, they can lead to chronic inflammation in the brain as well, which can lead to a lot of these genetic SNP expressions. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you guys and helps you guys to understand what is going on and how your body can kind of decrease that genetic expression, and understanding how it's not just necessarily the environment that we were in that's causing some of it, but also the genetic expression within your own body that's happening, and you're getting the symptoms because of the genetic expression of those specific SNPs. So it's important to understand that when you're kind of backing down these symptoms and trying to create better health for yourself, it really comes down to the root cause of what's going on. And so again, I was looking back on my blood work and how high a lot of my mercury levels were, and specific other toxins. And then, if you have adrenal fatigue and immunosuppression, you're just like the level of chronic inflammation that's setting off a lot of these SNP expression that's important to understand, because the better state that your body is in, the better your cells are functioning, the less you're getting these disease gene expressions. Okay, so the better your function is, the less toxins you have, inflammation, things like that, the better that your body will operate, and you will not get as much of that genetic gene expression. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. Thanks so much for joining in this week. Give me a thumbs up if that was helpful for you, and comment down below on what you would love to learn about. I wanted to really delve into that post that I made because I felt like it was really important, and that's not very common knowledge. Even other functional medicine practitioners, might not have the knowledge of, I'm just learning about that part within the last few months myself, those specific genes. So that's really, it's really powerful to understand what's going on with your body and really understand the root cause. And so if you want to break those generational patterns, not only within your own family, obviously you have to break the patterns of thought and behavior and with your own health and self-love, but also helping your body on a health level and understanding how you can bring that the symptomology down and your health and function up. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Again, I'm Dr. Misty Kosciuszko. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you guys next week.